you see how messy my desk is through my glasses? So you can see I've got a bit of a tripod going on. Hi everyone, I hope you're all doing really well. I am here with a book review for the book The Nightingale by Kristin Hannah. It's the first book review of the year that I'm going to be doing, and my first book review video ever, so do bear with me. I've done a bit of research onto how to do these reviews, but I'm still not 100% sure. So I'm just going to roll with it and we'll see how that goes. So if you've missed my initial welcoming video, that's absolutely fine, absolutely understandable. But just to give you a bit of background, I'm doing a 52-week reading challenge. So it all started when I went on Pinterest and I looked up book challenges because I like to have something to work towards when I'm reading. Otherwise I do lose focus and I don't get as many books read. I found this challenge by naturalbeachliving.com, big shout out. So how the challenge works is you get 52 pointers as to what to read, and they're quite vague but they're also quite specific. So the first one was to read a book that is becoming a film in 2021. So I did some research and there are a few books that I've wanted to read that are becoming films, but the one that really stood out to me was The Nightingale by Kristin Hannah. It's set in the World War II, and I'll be honest, I don't think I've ever read a World War II book before. I've only watched Schindler's List, that too in school or college, so I didn't really pay attention to it, and I've never read a World War II book. So I thought, you know what, this is the perfect thing for me to do. So I read The Nightingale and I finished it earlier this week, so this is my book review. So the book's set in the beginning of World War II and it's written from the perspective of two sisters, Vianne and Isabella. So they're polar opposites pretty much. Vianne is the more sort of rational, law-abiding older sister, whereas Isabel is the absolute rebellious teen that you can imagine. And when they were both young, their mother had passed away. And after their mother passed away, their father wasn't really there for them. He had his own issues and demons he was dealing with. So when they grew up not being very close as sisters. And the story is a lot about them as individuals. It's about the whole war. Oh, also it's set in Paris in France. So it's from the French sort of perspective of how World War II unfolded. So it's a really, really interesting book, and like I said, as someone who hasn't ever read any World War II stories, or really I'm not really familiar with anything that went on. I was on the other side of the world in Pakistan, so I don't really know World War II from a European perspective. So this was a really eye-opening read, and I'm not gonna lie, I cried. I don't cry at books, I don't cry at films, but the last few chapters in this book just sort of set me off. It showed to me how powerful this story was. As someone who was quite detached from everything that was going on, it was really eye-opening for me. So how I'll do this is I'll go through some pros and some cons of the book that I found, although just a bit of a disclaimer, I didn't really find too many cons because like I said, I thoroughly enjoyed this. I felt the emotions. So there's not too many cons, but we'll go through them anyway. My first pro I've written down is it was beautiful. It was such a beautiful story, the way it was written. It was really, really beautiful, and I think the way they described France, for me, the different places, there was Paris that was described, there was a small village I think called Caravou that was described, and then the people and the houses and what they looked like. I could really set the scene and I could imagine it all. And the fact that this is turning into a film later on this year is really exciting because I would love to see that visualised and come to life. So that was the first pro I've got written down. The second pro for me was the character progression. So I do struggle with empathizing with characters when I read books, and at the start of this, I'll be honest, I thought I'm never gonna like Isabel, she's very annoying, and Vienne is just too timid for me. So I didn't think I would gel with these characters as much as I did and care for them. So like I said, the main characters are the sisters Isabel and Vienne, but there are different characters. So for example, Vienne's daughter Sophie, there's Vienne's best friend Rachel, or Isabel's love interest Gaton, or Captain Beck. So there's lots of different characters that you just find yourself caring about, and even the characters that you're not meant to care about or you shouldn't really empathize with, you end up empathizing with them. And one of my absolute favorite characters to read about and to see unfolding in the chapters was Vienne and Isabel's dad, the Papa character. And I think because they've gone through a whole war, they've gone through hell and back, so the characters at the start are very different to the characters you meet at the end. So I think that was really beautiful. And that brings me to the third thing that I liked about this book, and that was the way that romance was shown. I think it was shown very maturely. They could have very, very easily done something really cringe or really like icky, but for me, the romance was done very, very maturely, and I think it felt quite real. It felt quite, it was painful at times. You were immersed into it at times. So I think the way that that was done was great. Also, this is a no spoiler review, so I'm not going to go into detail about all of the things that happen, but I really loved the romance that was shown in this book. So that concludes the pros, I thought. I mean, I thought there were lots more pros, but I'd have to go into a lot of detail and spoilers in order to say all of them. So I'll just leave it at that. So that brings me to cons. So for me, it was pacing. And I know they had to show this 5-6 year time period in a 440 odd page book. I get that 100%. So they're going to have to jump from different points. But for me, that wasn't really clear sometimes, or there were some questions left unanswered and I wanted to know the answer, but then they jumped 6 months ahead. So the timeline was a little bit too fast-paced for me. That was the one thing that I think that could have been improved, maybe explaining the timeline more if there were some things left unanswered, so just maybe going back and addressing them and then moving on. So that was one thing that I thought could have been different. The second thing was, so like I said, at the start I really disliked some of the characters, and by the end of it they did progress into beautiful characters, but then some of them were just sort of left, and I wanted to know more. What had happened to them? So for example, some of the more rebellious characters, I didn't really know what happened to them until maybe right at the end, or not at all. So that was a little bit frustrating for me as a reader, because even though they're smaller characters, I'm still interested in what happens to them. And the second thing was that at the start they were quite almost like caricatures. So there was the rebellious one, there was the rebellious love interest, there was this, there was that. So I just wanted to know a bit more about them and not just have them end up being caricatures, because the main characters, they did progress for me, but those other characters, there wasn't a story for them, or a detailed story for them, they just got left. But in all honesty, that's just me being really petty. I think overall on Goodreads I've given this book 5 stars. I really, really did enjoy it. So that was my review for The Nightingale by Kristin Hannah. Just going into the next book I'm reading. So the next book on the challenge is read a YA novel, a young adult novel. So there are lots and lots of books to choose from that are YA, but for me, I have chosen John Green's Paper Towns to read next. So I have wanted to read Paper Towns for years, since the book came out really. And then the film came out and I thought, I can't watch the film until I've read the book. So I'm finally going to give this book a go. The story premise seems really interesting. It's about a boy fancying a girl, but the girl just leaves and we find out who the real girl is. I mean, that was really bad. I could have just read that for you, but yeah, it's just really interesting. So I will come back with another book review next week. This week expect a film review from me later on, as I've watched The Full Monty this week. Again, my film reviews are based on challenges that I've found on Pinterest, so I'll explain that all in my film review video. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this book review. I did go on a little bit as always, but I really hope you enjoyed it. Thank you. Bye.